What's happening, guys and girls? Acrinator here, and welcome to what I seriously hope will be the last time I'll need to revamp this series. Assuming you've already seen the update video that came out with this, you should already know how I plan on moving forward. If the title of this video wasn't obvious enough, I'll be giving an in-depth guide on how to perform a very specific strategy that I came up with. So without any further ado, let's dive straight into it. This is a strategy I came up with in order to get past the choke leading into the first point of Hanamura. So this is only relevant for the attacking team. Likewise, this will require the full cooperation from all 6 members of your team. You will also need certain roles to be filled by specific heroes depending on the situation you're in, but we'll cover the details later on. For those familiar with how dive comp works, this is your standard 2-4 dive, meaning that 2 of you will dive in and the rest of your team will then collapse in on the enemies shortly thereafter. I've dubbed this a split dive because obviously your team will be splitting up temporarily, but also because the goal is to force a few of the enemy team to peel back to the point to deal with you. The ideal situation for this comp is to get 2 bodies on the point, force 1 or 2 of the enemies to peel back from the choke, kill them, and then assault the rest of the defenders from both sides. If everything goes accordingly, you should be able to pull this off with minimal casualties and take the point with ease. Now that I've gone over the basics, let's cover the specific roles required to make this work, as well as the picks you can choose from to fill them. Just like pretty much every other dive that I know of, you'll need a Winston to act as the primary tank. He'll be the one to do the major shot calling as well as initiating this whole process. The one thing you'll absolutely need to be capable of is jumping from the building overlooking the choke over the enemy team and onto the back line right on top of the first point. So if you're not super comfortable with Winston, I'd recommend practicing jumping around in a custom game. This role is actually one of the easier ones since it really only requires a short list of physical results from you. However, you will need to relay tons of information to the rest of your team so that they know when it's best to collapse in on the rest of the defenders. Of the things you'll be adding to your to-do list, you'll need to make your way up to the walkway before the choke point and head into the aforementioned building overlooking the choke. The only difficult part here will be if there are any enemy DPS camping up there, in which case you just need to clear them out and wait for the rest of your team to get into positions. While waiting, huddle up against the wall as I am here. Bonus points if there are enemy DPS up there and you end up killing them, because that will give you a definitive advantage for what comes next. Just jump out of the window and over to the point along with one of your other teammates. I personally recommend jumping out of the window, falling down a bit before using your jump pack to give you a better angle of approach. You are most likely to land right next to the stairs, where you'll just need to walk up onto the point and drop your shield for protection. Depending on who the other diver is on your team, you may also have to protect them as well, but more on that later. For now, just focus on capturing the point and killing anyone who peels back to defend. You'll also need to keep a close eye on what the rest of the enemies are doing. If the entire enemy team peels back at once, your team will need to rush in quickly to save you. Assuming the ideal situation has occurred and you've killed those that have peeled back, you should communicate to your team that now's the time to dive in what remains of the defense. Of course, at this point, the standard target priority applies, and considering you're Winston, you'll want to go after the supports and any other squishies you can find. The other role for this strategy that requires one particular hero would be that of the secondary healer, in which case Zenyatta is really the only choice you have. While he isn't the only long-range healer, he is the only one that has Orb of Discord. The extra damage potential that gives is absolutely crucial to cleaning up the defense once the collapse happens. You'll be sticking with the majority of your team, which will either be in this position just around the corner from this building or up against the wall of the choke. Personally, I'd recommend the former, as there isn't much room for sneak attacks here. Once in position, be sure to place your Orb of Harmony on the DPS that will be diving with your Winston. They have significantly less health than the tank and are at a much higher risk of getting killed mid-dive. Once that's set up, you just have to sit tight and wait for a word from your Winston to move in for the kill. Then your role is to apply Discord to the appropriate targets to be focused down. For the flanking DPS role, you have one of 3 choices in terms of hero selection. Depending on what you are more comfortable with, you could choose Genji, Sombra, or Tracer. Not taking into account personal preferences, Genji is likely the strongest pick for this role, with Sombra as the next best and Tracer being the weakest pick out of the 3. Genji has infinitely more mobility than the other 2 flankers, as well as his deflectability, meaning that he should have the easiest time to get out of harm's way and over to the point as quickly as possible. Sombra has her run and translocator abilities, which should help her in terms of mobility, though her path to the point will be more dangerous than Genji's. The one upside she has is her hack ability, which will help in taking out any that peel back to the point, assuming that you make it there in one piece. Tracer has basically the same path as Sombra, though it will require her to be significantly more vulnerable than her counterparts. While Sombra's translocator telegraphs her destination, she teleports directly from point A to point B, whereas Tracer must take multiple blinks to get to the same spot. Taking into account that she has less health than either Genji or Sombra, choose her at your own peril. Once you've chosen who you're going to dive in with, your next course of action will be more or less the same regardless of who you choose. Head to the stairs leading to the walkway on the left and help your Winston clear out any enemies if there are any. Once that's taken care of, take up position as you see me doing here and get ready to dive through the small window directly in front of you. The biggest thing here is something that makes or breaks all dive compositions: coordination. Your Winston should be telling you, and ideally counting down, when he's going in, so that you can both get to the point within moments of each other. You may even want to dive in a second or two before him so that you hit the point at the exact same time. The specifics of that are up to your discretion, however. If you're playing as Genji, just dash straight through the window and onto the ledge overlooking the courtyard in front of the first point. Then simply double jump onto the ledge on the pagoda as you see me doing here, and head over to the window overlooking the point itself. This high ground should give you a good vantage point to deal with any enemies. If you chose Sombra, use your shift ability to go invisible, throw the translocator through the window at about the angle you see me doing here, and you should land right about at the stairs right next to Winston. The largest caution for you is that you can't just throw your translocator early, otherwise the enemy will likely notice and prepare for you. Only throw it during Winston's jump to make sure they won't preemptively attack and kill you. If you choose to run with Tracer, you'll need to make sure that you're capable of blinking through the window from the ledge. Since blink is relatively unpredictable mid-air, you'll probably need to practice a bit to get the hang of it. Using all 3 blinks should bring you to about the same place that Sombra would land. Try getting to the point quickly to lessen the opportunities the defenders will have to eliminate you. Winston will need the extra damage you provide to cleanly engage. No matter who you're running, you should focus down anyone peeling back to the point first, before collapsing in with the rest of your team. Once the collapse starts is when you can go back to a normal target priority of healers and whatnot. For the role of main healer on your team, you can pretty much choose from every other healer in the game, though I'd personally recommend Ana, Lucio, Mercy, or Moira, specifically in that order from most to least recommended. I'm not entirely sure how the new character on the PTR could fit into this, so I left her out of consideration for this video. Ana is probably the best choice here because she gives a large long-ranged healing output. As long as the people on the point are smart enough to move into the open to get heals, they shouldn't have any problems staying alive. Also, if Ana could get a miracle sleep dart off from a long range, that'd probably snowball this entire thing into a win for your team. While Lucio can't provide long-range heals to those on point, he can speed boost the rest of your team that stayed back in towards the point for the collapse. Especially depending on what tank you decide to have stay back, he could be invaluable, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Mercy certainly isn't as strong as she used to be, however she does still have damage boost, which could help you in the cleanup during the collapse. That on top of having some of the most reliable healing output in the game makes her a reasonable pick here if you're not comfortable with Lucio or Ana. Moira has potential to be useful here, though she's a bit of a gamble. The thought process with picking her is that she could throw her healing biotic orb towards the point to help Winston and the flanker if they need it. However, if the enemy has a D.Va to use her defense matrix or a Genji to use deflect on it, that plan is rendered useless. If you're really not comfortable with any other healers, you could possibly stretch this plan to make her work, but it's definitely the most risky pick of the bunch. For the majority of picks here, you want to be down on the main street with the rest of your team. However, if you choose Ana, you'll actually want to go up into the building overlooking the choke with Winston. This will give you the best vantage point to heal anyone on the point. You'll just have to look out for enemy DPS, specifically snipers, to make sure that you stay alive long enough to heal your team. If you choose Lucio, you'll want to speed boost your team around the bend through the choke as soon as you get word from Winston. This will hopefully catch the defenders unaware and you can hammer them from multiple sides all at once. Mercy will primarily want to be damage boosting the non-flanking DPS on your team in order to secure as many kills as possible in as short a time as possible. The faster you clean house, the less risky this play becomes. And if you choose Moira, you really are going to want to use your healing orb over your damage one. An all-out brawl will likely erupt shortly after the dive, and you're certainly not going to be the primary damage dealer, so please be smart and just heal as needed. For your secondary tank that'll be staying back with the rest of the team, you'll likely want a barrier tank, though D.Va could also work depending on how you use her. The order in which I'd personally recommend choosing tanks from most recommended to least would be Reinhardt, Zarya, D.Va, and Orisa. No real room for Roadhog here, but I'll get to the possibility of using him in just a little bit. Reinhardt can charge in and ideally take out an unsuspecting defender when the collapse happens, lessening the resistance even further. That's not to mention his barrier as well as the burst damage from his fire strike. He's probably going to be your best bet here. Zarya has the added benefit of shielding the Winston when he dives in, giving him more room to work with in case the enemies try to counter his jump. She also has a good damage output when charged up, which she could potentially farm a bit while waiting for the dive to happen. I count her so high in regard for this plan mostly for her defensive capabilities, however. D.Va does have her matrix to cancel any poke damage that may come in while waiting for the dive, but her major upside here would be the burst damage she could do if she boosts in while using her rockets. She's definitely a large ult battery, but depending on your damage output versus theirs, you might be able to edge out if played correctly. Orisa does have the issue of her stationary shield, however she also has the halt and fortify abilities to throw the enemy team off, and keeping herself alive if need be. She's not a horrible pick here, she just doesn't have as much utility as pretty much every other option for this specific role. Regardless of who you choose, you're going to want to wait by the corner of the building I mentioned earlier to avoid most incoming damage. You can take a little bit of poke damage to charge your support ultimates, but just be careful not to take too much and die. If you choose Zarya, you will need to poke out during the dive to give Winston a bubble before he gets out of your line of sight, so just be wary of that. It wouldn't do much good to pick Zarya and not be able to bubble your dive tank, so it may be a good idea to practice that a little before trying it out for real. If you're playing as Rein, you want to take advantage of any opportunity you get to charge kill a player. At this point in the plan, kills and not dying yourself are the only things that matter. The first point has an attacker's advantage anyways, so try to get as many limbs as you can without being totally reckless. Orisa, while easily having the least utility out of the tank options here, can still be useful once the fight breaks out in full. Pulling defenders together with your halt can give your team an easier time in picking off anyone that remains. Not as good as a more instant elimination like something with charge, but it still works if used correctly. The biggest thing for this role is that they should always be following the standard target priority because you're just engaging in a normal team fight by the time you get there. This is going to be the easiest role to fill in terms of hero pool, but it will also be one of the least forgiving in terms of what you have to provide. You can honestly pick any hero you want for this role, so long as you can get eliminations efficiently. This can be anything from Widowmaker to Soldier to Bastion to Roadhog or even Symmetra. Just make sure to get fast kills. You are the primary cog in the machine that is the cleanup crew, and you'll likely be the one to do the most damage. So basically, you just need to go on a bloody rampage and make sure that you don't die in the process. So going through the more standard compositions that could be expected from this strategy, the basic layout I'd recommend, taking player preferences out of the equation, would be Winston, Reinhardt, Genji, Soldier, Zenyatta, and Ana. I put Soldier as the non-flanking DPS here because he's all around good and has a reliable amount of damage output to go with just about any plan. If you want to run an Orisa, I'd recommend running a Lucio to give her the extra speed needed to make her more useful. That would make the whole comp for this scenario Winston, Orisa, Genji, Soldier, Zenyatta, and Lucio. And if you have a god tier Widowmaker on your team that can pop heads just about as fast as you can blink, then I'd personally recommend choosing Mercy as your main healer. We all know how effective damage boosting a Widow can be. And remember that these three are just options that you have to choose from if you want to run this strategy. I'm laying down the framework for you to fill in the gaps depending on what your group is capable and willing to work with. Every plan has its flaws, and this one is no exception. What's more is that it's important to realize and respect what could go wrong in order to prepare for the worst case scenario if and when it happens. This comp is high risk, high reward, meaning that everything will likely either go in your favor or crash and burn hard. The worst case scenario is that you're the ones to be divided and conquered, and you're forced to hard reset. The weakest links in the chain are definitely the flanking DPS and the moment when Winston jumps out of the window for the dive. The flankers will have Zen's Harmony Orb on them for a few seconds, but that won't help them if they get one shot. Also, it's not impossible to stop Winston in mid-air, forcing him to fall directly in the middle of the enemy team. If that happens, he's essentially mincemeat at that point. This plan takes a lot of coordination and skill from most of the people involved, which is pretty much impossible to get on a pug. Depending on how many friends you have to play with and are willing to try something like this out, you'll likely come up with varying results, and that's not even taking into account that this will probably only fool the defenders once, so it's not something that you can just keep doing over and over again. It loses its novelty after a short while. However risky this plan may be, if you each practice your roles and communicate appropriately, there is the very real possibility that this will work wonders for breaking that pesky choke point. While this takes a lot of coordination with your team to pull off, it also means that if you do succeed, you're likely going to win anyways. Also, depending on how hard you break their defenses, you could potentially steamroll into second point and take that in record time. And that's all I've really got for you in regards to this strategy. Of course, there's more that could be customized to suit your desires compared to what I showed you today, but I'll leave that much up to your own imaginations. I hope you enjoyed this video, and maybe I even got you thinking about ways to come up with your own strategies. This whole thing really just started with me practicing my jump with Winston, and eventually I began to wonder how I could use that ability in conjunction with my entire team to break the choke in a real game. From there, I just filled in the roles that I thought I needed, and well, here we are. Anyways, if you did enjoy this, feel free to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more like it, maybe even subscribe. I'll try to come up with some strategies or tricks that don't necessarily require an entire team to work next time. Links to my social media and whatnot are in the description below, and as for the comment question, this isn't so much a question as it is a request. Obviously, I don't have that many people to create a whole custom game with and record how this strategy appears to work, so I'll pass that on to you. If you happen to know enough people to get a team together and attempt this plan in quick play or competitive or whatever, please send me a video of how it worked out. In my head, I can see this working out well enough with the proper execution, but that's all in theory. I'd love to see real-world attempts, even if they end hilariously bad. But that's all the time I've got for today, so until next time, don't die.